Hello and welcome to Infocus. I'm Bradley Valenaki. Thanks for your company on the last episode for 2021. Now we're going to talk about the budget. What is a budget? Budget in Papua New Guinea, the 2022 national budget. A person, when he or she wants to go out, always has a money plan. How much he or she will make in a day, how much they're willing to spend, and also how much he or she will get from the parent or whoever else is willing to give in Papua New Guinea. So now I'm privileged to have with me in the studio Mr. Dovery Henao from the PNG Business Council. So welcome to the program.
Bradley, it's a pleasure.
Let's firstly understand what's behind this money plan and what the government intends to achieve in this.
Well, it's really in the realm of political economy when we're trying to deeply understand the drive, the focus, the interest. So if we look beyond Volume 1, we look beyond the budget books, all of the development plans, and fundamentally, what is the Marape government's main focus, main interest? And in a classical political ideology space, it's quite safe to assume that it follows national budgets of other prime ministers prior, in the sense that it's highly driven for the people. It's major expenditure items, new expenditure items are all designed to take basic services out into the rural areas. So you could definitely see those features prevailing in a format that's quite notably socialist in its outlook, and that transcends into the economic policy as well. There is the belief that a very large government, a very intensive government that's geared towards multiple facets and not just on service delivery. It's a government that's focused on larger regulations. It's a government that's focused on walking into the private sector, walking into business, walking into economics. Now, the proponents and the supporters of this will say government needs to do this because there is market failure, a term that's branded where economics and business and commerce can't happen because the ecosystem that's there is not attractive for investment. That's why you need government to step in and push significant resources in that space. And so that's the observation that many of us have had over the past couple of years, and this budget follows that pathway. The only significant difference, and we'll definitely touch on those features as we discuss further, the only key difference in this particular budget is it's actually much more pronounced in how it wants to drive that socialist agenda, how it wants to drive that big government agenda. And it's at the expense, in many cases, of the market. When we see budgets prior, there has always been an attempt to use private sector as a partner of nation building. We've seen incentives, we've seen a whole lot of stimulus and strategies in lifting the private sector so that it will complement the national aspirations, largely, of course, through tax and non-tax means, but also as a genuine nation-building partner. So where there are service delivery challenges, private sector are able to complement those features. So just imagine salaries, wages, rent, motor vehicles, and then you have 50% of that operational budget. In other words, whatever money's been made, 50% of that is expended in an alternative power supply, whether it's a generator, fuel consumption. The fact is, because the transmission distribution lines are not successfully providing the power supply. So if we have that transmission distribution resolved, that 50% immediately drops. And that money can be recycled into more jobs, more investments, more expansions. So that is a net multiplier for business. It's the right type of investment. We also see that on the ports example I gave, much more safer ports means more bulk cargoes, and even containerizations can move freely. At the moment, we're a break bulk that's how cargoes move around the country. Containerizations haven't been able to really capture the market because our ports have been smaller. But here we have a situation where investments are made in expanding the ports, and we can have containerizations move around the marketplace. Larger ships can berth. So the capital side of the budget is definitely great news. Then there is the more usual governmental challenges that we've been facing over the years, and the budget caters for that. So the first one is the arrears. Consistently, our members and broadly the private sector have indicated arrears dating all the way back to the Pacific Games that small, medium enterprises haven't been paid. Suppliers haven't been paid. Recently in the APAC year in 2018, the same bill as well. So there is now a genuine commitment to increase the payment of those arrears. And the other important part, of course, is the superannuations and the retirement funds for that as well. So those elements of the budget are definitely a big. It's got the right type of messages for the growth of the private sector.
All right. So, Mr. Henna, we'll just go for a quick break there and come back on the other side with more of these interesting discussions now. We'll take a break. Welcome back to Infocus. Still discussions with Mr. Doveri Henna from the PNG Business Council. Now, before the break, interesting discussions there. Still on government owings to even the small businesses here in Papua New Guinea, like you said, dating back to 2015 Pacific Games. Now, so you spoke about the real commitment that government is showing. Is actual funding going to settle those debts?
Absolutely. So again, the treasurer came with a very, very targeted focus on repair the budget. And a big element of his drive has been setting up an arrears committee. It's an interagency committee. We've had the privilege of meeting several folks participating in that. And it's a daunting task. And I'll expand on why it's a daunting task and how that relates to a larger problematic challenge in the budget. But it's a daunting task because there is a major challenge on absorbing paper trails, administrative systems, bona fide payments. And because of this challenge of absorbing these administrative functions, the Arrears Committee has had to almost use the past 18 months, 2 years to validate if these services did happen. They had to validate if these transactions have occurred or not. And again, it comes to this larger problem in the public service about systems that can absorb these sorts of administrative financial functions. And this is where the challenge has been present. These are where the delays have occurred. And so the priorities of these payments, certainly an appetite is present within government to actively address this issue. But it's also important, Bradley, to distinguish what are the arrears. So on one end, you have the arrears associated with government service. On the other end, you have arrears associated with things like reimbursements of GST. That is a significant bubble that has not been addressed in a timely manner as well. So GST reimbursements, as many folks that are listening appreciate this. This is where a provisional GST has been paid. And then whilst that provisional GST has been paid, it's then been validated through an assessment that this is the real amount. Now the balance, if it exceeds, that has to be reimbursed. And in most cases, the private sector, on those provisional basis, have made those payments, but the government simply hasn't, or IRC in particular, hasn't reimbursed those GST payments. A very smart thing happened last year when what they call a contra payment, where instead of paying my corporate tax, my other taxes, can you offset my GST reimbursement with how much I owe you in corporate tax, for example? So those contra payments significantly reduced that. But late last year, the commissioner changed his view on the contra payment, and we now have a much larger portion of GST reimbursement that's still outstanding. And that is where much of that dilemma remains. So when we talk about arrears, yes, the SMEs are getting addressed, the businesses are getting addressed, but that GST reimbursement, by and large, is still not being addressed yet.
All right. You touched a bit of tax in your conversation. The super tax that's going to be introduced by government next year. The Prime Minister on the floor of Parliament said this won't happen until July. So your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, it's important to identify the motivation of the tax first. And a basic 101 on taxation, if you are going to tax an entity or a person, there must be a correlating strategy on why you're collecting it. So I know that when I get clipped on income tax, so do you and others. It goes to the public service for functions with the police and others. Even in a non-tax environment, when a levy is applied, for example, in the mineral sector, MRA collects that from a production levy. We know that the function of the MRA is to regulate the mining sector. So there's always a causation, there's always a link when one actually raises, when the government raises a tax for a particular purpose. Now, in other economies, when you have a banking tax or provision similar to what's being proposed or what's now law, and I'll start with the banking tax first, that's designed to absorb risks that the banking sector is going to have on its population. So in the global financial crisis in 2008, we saw various banking levies and taxes applied right across the world. And that was largely designed to administer shocks and risks that the banking sector had given to its population. We're not entirely seeing what is the banking risk, or what is the consumer risk, what is the economy risk that the bank has produced, and in particular, Bank South Pacific. What has Bank South Pacific produced that has to be offset by a tax? So that's the first complication in this narrative. We're not entirely sure what it is. Obviously, government needs to raise money. It needs to raise money to deliver its basic services, its objectives, and its programs. Again, it's a double blow because Bank South Pacific is not just raising revenue for its shareholders. Almost 40% of its operations are highly non-profitable. So you have sub-branches right across Papua New Guinea, which are responsible for teachers going and picking up their wages, You and I that are in the city, when we push out our money back to our families, the sub-branches are designed so that they can pick up the cash wherever they are, and mostly in the rural areas. It doesn't make any money. If they're not making money, then they're there purely as a service delivery arm to bring out financial inclusion right across the country. If such a tax was going to come forward and be implemented, then definitely those branches cannot operate. And what that would mean is a major service delivery item pushing right throughout the districts and the local governments. It simply won't be operational.
So the likely effect of this will, when we're talking about bringing those that are in the unbankable, unbanked bracket, will simply not achieve that by doing this. So something for us to think about going forward. We'll go for a short break and come back on the other side with more of the discussions. Welcome back to our discussions on Infocus, looking at the 2022 national budget, this from the business perspective here in Papua New Guinea. And budget over the years have been built on the back of disasters we've experienced in the country, but also on the flip side of it, on the revenue side of it, on projects that have come on board. And in this case, in Papua New Guinea, we're looking at the projects that are coming not only next year, but in the years to come. And the most notable one is the Pogera mine next year. So when it comes to business, looking at it, how does the Business Council, forecast the sort of impacts this will have on the economy?
Again, just to peel this back and make it more basic, it all comes down to how realistic are the projections in the revenue space. That's going to drive whether you can have expenditure to conduct these programs, these projects, and these activities. I was on a panel last week discussing the revenue strategy, and many of our panel members agreed that especially the ambition of Pogera's numbers and the restart of Pogera's numbers, they're quite bold, they're quite ambitious, and so I do want to make that particular comment for your viewers that there is a lot of emphasis, almost a messianic Messiah complex, that Pogera is going to be the big driver and changer for next year. But there are several complications in that. Number one, from an engineering standpoint, you need to dry the pit. You need to kickstart the operations. You need to, literally, you're starting it up all over again. So yes, it will be reopened. The interest and the drive is to commence its operations, but we're probably not going to see the gold production and the sale of the gold production until June, July, well into the mid-second quarter next year. And so it then begs the question, are the numbers that have been identified as a jumpstart, as a restart, are those numbers realistic in terms of a revenue projection? Again, there are super smart people out there that can further articulate that, but it's important that your viewers appreciate that jump-starting these projects is not like a switch. It's going to require massive mobilizations back. And that, of course, is at the backdrop of a highly unstable period that we're getting into in the national elections. So all of this has a major bearing on how and when the mine would reopen, but more importantly, when the production will kickstart. So that's the major caution that we definitely would want to caution about the expectations on the revenue inflows of Porgera. And then the second part, of course, is the budget places a significant emphasis that the non-resource sector is going to have a huge rebound. The markets are opening. Our agricultural, our semi-manufacturing, our fisheries, it's going to start moving into the nominal figures that were pre-COVID. And so there is this expectation that this driver is going to increase the revenue space as well. Again, we're cautious of this, and unlike the Porgera example I gave, there has been business continuity in the extractives. It is still, the production lines are still active, they're still mobilizing during this whole period. But it's not a question about our production lines anymore. The entire global supply chain is also in an absolute mess. There's huge demands, and the demands are not being met because of COVID. A classical case is Ella Motors actually has a huge back order on the 10-seaters and the 5 doors, not because there's not enough ships that are there, not because we don't have the cash, or Ella Motors doesn't have the cash to buy it. It's because Japan and the manufacturing plants in Tokyo, they don't have the full staff to manufacture these productions of these vehicles so that it can cater for the demand of P&G. And so this is where the challenge sits. We're producing the gold, we're producing the silver, we're getting it out, but we're competing with the global supply chain that everyone else is trying to get. And you just have to look at the Los Angeles port. Huge backlogs on containers because every ship is just being drained out there.
True. And like a country, Papua New Guinea, at the moment we our vaccine numbers basically is also very low. So reality check, if we're going into the future, we have to also ensure that our population is also vaccinated for us to also do business with those in the global market as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I was at the Chamber of Mines conference last week, and that subject did come out. What is the business environment for a highly low vaccinated market like ours? And the critical thing is we just have to continue being resilient. The last thing we need is the market to be closed. And so the journey for Papua New Guinea is precisely that. We are going to get judicial actions on whether it's constitutional or not. We are going to get very sensitive supply chains that will have no tolerance on non-vaccine related positions of their employees. And for us, I've consistently said this over the past couple of years, the biggest challenge for private sector is the market being closed, and we can't have that. How we journey that, the policy interventions, the political will, creative business continuity plans, that's going to be P&G's story, and it's a story that you and I are going to be observing as it evolves.
All right. Mr. Doveri Henao from the P&G Business Council, thank you very much for making time to speak with us on the program.
Thank you, Bradley. Cheers.
All right. This has been In Focus. If you have comments on the program tonight, you can comment on the email now showing, or you can engage with us social on our social space. Now, from all of us here, it's been a pleasure having you on board with us on In Focus in the year 2022. On behalf of the team and myself, my family, have a pleasant Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year. Stay safe. Bye-bye.